Okay, so that's the picture with energy, but a big part of this trip is transport. Imagine getting on board a train in Western China in the morning and getting off in Tehran in the evening after a 3,000-kilometer trip through some of the world's least known regions. That's China's plan for linking up a newly emerging Iran, sending trains from Urumqi in Western China all the way to Tehran along the Silk Road there. Now, Tehran has, or Iran I should say, has very outdated trains. They often run at only 60 kilometers an hour. These trains would be sending passengers at up to 300 kilometers an hour back and forth along this route. Freight trains as well, they're not quite as fast as that. And a major bonus for all of this is unifying the railway tracks. Iran and much of Central Asia run on a wider gauge of around 1.5 meters. Now that means wasting time when trains get to frontiers or borders and ports, and having to unload and reload rail freight onto other trains. The trains that China proposes to build along this route would have the international standard that would link up China, Iran, and of course the West. So this would really join the dots in this part of the world. Well, the wider Middle East conflict has put Iran and Saudi Arabia at loggerheads recently. President Xi was in Saudi Arabia before heading to Iran. So I asked Professor Mohammad Marandi from Tehran University if that was a problem for Iranian businesses and consumers.
No, not at all. First of all, Iran didn't break off ties with Saudi Arabia. The Saudis broke off ties. And Iran has no problem with the Chinese president traveling both to Iran and to Saudi Arabia.
How do you look at the relationship between Iran and China, and how would your students look at this relationship? How do the young generation look at China?
Well, I think there are many people who are impressed by the fact that the Chinese have been able to develop their economy so swiftly over the past few decades. And that is something that has not gone unnoticed by younger people. I also think that in general, the opportunity for rapidly improving economic ties has arrived. On the one hand, the one policy that is very key for Iran is developing its regional ties, and the One Belt, One Road policy of China is very much in line with Iranian thinking. At the same time, the Chinese would be very interested, of course, in developing economic ties that are linked to oil and gas and the energy sector, and Iran is enormously wealthy in both fields, gas and oil. So there are many issues that bring the two countries together. And also there's the threat of extremism, which is dangerous to the One Belt, One Road policy and is a national security issue for China and for Iran. So therefore, all of these combined make this an opportune moment for the two countries to develop ties at all levels.
We're at this fascinating juncture in history. The sanctions against Iran by the West have been lifted. You've talked a lot about China, the Silk Road. Is Iran looking east rather than west, despite the fact that you're going to have all these Western companies coming in and competing with perhaps Chinese companies in Iran for business?
I think Iran will be looking in both directions. For the time being, the United States and Iran will probably not have any serious economic ties because the relations are not very good. Europe has changed a great deal, especially since the terrorist attacks in Paris, as well as the huge wave of refugees that have gone to Europe. There will be a stronger European relationship with Iran, and the Iranian president is indeed going to Italy and France next week. But I think that Iranian-Chinese relations are really very extensive, and they're growing at a very rapid pace. And Iran and China have both the potential to trade by sea, but also through the Silk Road. And that adds a very strong element and an incentive for stronger Iranian-Chinese relations.
You mentioned the trade routes, Professor. We know that China is looking to build extensive railway networks in Iran. There's also lots of other infrastructure issues. What's the most important thing right now for Iranians? What do they need building most urgently?
Well, Iran has a pretty well-developed infrastructure, but Iran is also very keen on developing regional ties, because right now important neighbors in the region and are developing very close ties with Iran. This regional network between Iran, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Afghanistan are very important to develop. And of course, if these are linked up to the Silk Road that goes through Central Asia, that would allow China too to develop their trade with the countries in the region through Iran. So this is one key area. And also there's oil and gas. Iran can export both oil and gas through the Persian Gulf, but also through Central Asia. And Iraqi oil can also go through Iran to China through Central Asia. So oil can reach both West China as well as East China, and that is another, as well as gas. And these are added benefits of a strong relationship between Iran and China.